Good morning and welcome to the Maryland Public Service Commission's meeting for Wednesday, October 20th, 2021. It's a big day in Maryland, but it's a big day particularly for one municipality in the state, and that is the city of Hyattsville, Maryland. They've been a leader in the electrification of transportation for some time now. They unveiled their first electric police car several years ago. They've been known for their generosity in hosting L3 DC fast charging stations on city property at absolutely no cost for EV drivers, and I could attest that I've filled up there on the house before. However, there was two big new announcements that happened in Hyattsville this week with respect to the electrification of transportation. The first was the announcement earlier this week that K. Neal Bus Center is actually going to be selling new electric battery operated school buses. So that's a big deal. I suspect we'll see the electrification of our school bus fleet within the next decade or so. More interesting, at least to me, is that they've identified what the least fuel efficient vehicle on the road is, and they're going to electrify that. And that is a garbage truck. In most cases, a garbage truck doesn't get any more than about 3 miles per gallon. Typically, they run very short routes, no more than about 100 to 130 miles per day. And they make about 1,000 stops per day. So that start and stop routine is just perfect for an electric vehicle. So they cut the ribbon, and their electric garbage truck is now picking up trash in the city of Hyattsville. I've seen it in action, and it's amazingly quiet, and hopefully other municipalities identify that these are ripe targets for electrification. I heard one statistic that the average garbage truck uses about $42,000 in fuel every year. The cost to juice up with electricity would be substantially less. So congratulations to the municipality of Hyattsville, leading in so many ways. With that, I'd like to propose a motion for the approval of the meeting minutes from October 13th, 2021. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The meeting minutes are approved. Good morning, Mr. Secretary.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. There are two items on today's consent agenda. Item number one is a notice of intermediate transfer of control from BCM1 Inc., Wholesale Carrier Services Inc., and BCM1 Group Holdings Inc. And item number two is a notice of transfer of control from Magna 5 Holdings Inc. and International Telecom LLC.
Thank you. Seeing no questions from the commissioners, I would move that with respect to item number one, that we note the immediate transfer of control from BCM1 Incorporated and Wholesale Carrier Services Incorporated. And with respect to item number two, I move that we note the transfer of control from Magna 5 LLC to International Telecom LLC. The vote begins with Commissioner Herman.
Aye.
Commissioner Linton.
Aye.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Aye.
And Commissioner Richard.
Aye.
I vote aye. The motions are approved.
Mr. Chairman, item number three on the administrative agenda is a proposed request for proposal from the Empower Maryland Future Programming Work Group regarding a potential study to inform goal setting for Empower Maryland after the 2021 to 2023 program cycle. On this item, there are several participants, including for staff Dan Hurley and Michael Dean for MEA, Kiston McNeil and Michelle Honig, First Energy Edward Miller, Rebecca Harder, and Eric Rundy, for Office of People's Counsel Joe Cleaver, for Washington Gas Josh McClelland, for BGE Beverly Sikora and Sheldon Switzer, for Pepco Doug McKeel, for Exelon Pearl Donahue Ballot, as well as Maren Mahoney, Amy Klodowski, and Jim Gravatt.
Thank you. We will begin. Mr. Hurley, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Dan Hurley on behalf of staff. On September 21st, 2021, Public Utility Law Judge Division on behalf of the Empower Maryland Future Programming Work Group filed a request for proposal for a potential study to inform the goal setting for Empower Maryland after the 2021-2023 program cycle. In order number 89679, the Commission directed that a future programming work group be formed and led by the Pool J Division for the purpose of ensuring that upcoming Empower Maryland cycles are well informed and fully developed. As part of that directive, the Future Programming Work Group was tasked with looking at recommendations to provide a new goal structure. The Future Programming Work Group has met 13 times, with 6 of those meetings focused on goal structure. Stakeholders have agreed to a framework on a new proposed goal structure based on greenhouse gas abatement, which focuses on energy end use by consumers and aligns the Empower Maryland program with the state's overall greenhouse gas reduction goals. Finally, the work group determined that a potential study would be beneficial in determining utility-specific goals. The development of the RFP was a joint effort that resulted from multiple meetings with several of the stakeholders. As noted in Chief Public Law Judge McLean's filing letter, the RFP is not a full consensus document. Staff recommends the Commission approve the work group's request to issue the RFP for the potential study to assist in the development of future Empower Maryland goals. Finally, the Office of People's Counsel filed comments on this matter on October 18th, 2021. Thank you, and I am available for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hurley. I know we have a number of parties on the line. Who would like to speak next, if anybody? Office of People's Counsel, Mr. Cleaver. Good morning.
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, good. Yes, Your Honor. As Judge McLean noted in his cover letter accompanying his report, this is not a consensus document, and the issue that we've raised in our comments of October 18th, that is the issue that Judge McLean specifically called out. OPC's concern specifically is with the language on page 8 of the proposed RFP, midway down the page in section D, third full paragraph. Basically provides for stakeholder input on the draft report from the contractor, but gives the contractor ability to incorporate those comments as deemed appropriate by the contractor, with no further standards as to what standard the contractor is to apply as it reviews the comments that come in. And in light of the importance of this proposal, of the RFP, and of this issue to the state, OPC's position, which was initially raised by the Maryland Energy Efficiency Advocates, but which we have endorsed in the working group context, is that there should be some stated standard for how the contractor deals with such feedback. Specifically, what we've proposed, and again, this is echoing MEEA's initial suggestion, is that the contractor should include defensible feedback received from stakeholders, and in the event that the contractor determines not to incorporate or include such feedback, that it state the basis for doing so. Empower is a the parties and the stakeholders that are involved in these meetings, as the commission knows, are very familiar with the issues. I wouldn't anticipate a lot of frivolous or bad faith suggestions, and indeed there is this standard of defensible, but in the event that there is a suggestion that's made that the contractor deems inappropriate, the contractor, under what we've proposed in terms of this modification, would still have the ability to not include that feedback, but would have to provide a basis to the parties as to why it wasn't included. And beyond that, I'll just submit on the comments. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Cleaver. Do any other parties wish to address that matter or any other matter?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, Doug Mikeel on behalf of PHI and the work group. And then we also have here today Dr. Donahue Villette, who will speak. But I just wanted to respond specifically to OPC's claim that there's no standard in the proposed RFP. And I think that's absolutely incorrect. When you look at page 8, it notes that recommendations from stakeholders will be considered by the contractor, incorporated when considered appropriate by the contractor. And this is the key: after balancing all input received and in consideration of standard industry practice or relevant research. So I think we've got an appropriate balance here, and it's just not that the contractor can, randomly disregard folks' input. I'll see if Dr. Villette has any other comments on that topic.
Thank you, and thank you for the commissioners for hosting us this morning and for this discussion. I would echo what has already been put forward by my counsel and emphasize that paragraph where this process to develop the RFP, and as noted by OPC, includes significant feedback from many parties that participated in the work group, and that the tone for the contractor is set at the beginning of the paragraph, noting that feedback from all stakeholders is very important to this process and should be included, as is appropriate, based on the expertise of a contractor that we would hire for their expertise in this topic. We do have concerns with defensible as a standard, because defensible from our perspective could be used as a very low bar for what the contractor would be required to consider and respond to. We have concerns that this approach could turn into a working group-like approach where a contractor that we would hire as a group for the expertise in this area would instead turn into a working group where each party would need to bring their expert, and that contractor then would spend their time adjudicating concerns between stakeholders, which would not lead to the expeditious study that I think all parties have agreed is needed if we're to successfully perform this to inform the commission as well as the legislative processes.
Thank you. Any other parties? Hearing none.
I apologize, Your Honor. It took me a second to hit the button. Would it be all right if I spoke?
Yes, Mr. Gravatt, please proceed.
Thank you, sir. Jim Gravatt on behalf of the Maryland Energy Efficiency Advocates. Thank you, commissioners and Mr. Chairman, for hosting us today. And I also really want to recognize Judge McLean and Judge Burke for their work group process, which has been really inclusive and collaborative, I think. I just want to respond on this issue. And, when we began in the work group discussing the potential study, I think probably my first comment was, I've been involved in litigation of potential studies in a lot of states where the potential studies have significantly underestimated potential, where they have disregarded information that was provided by stakeholders. I've been in lots of stakeholder processes where I've been asked for opinions, I've provided opinions, and then they've, the judgment of the contractor was to disregard them. And I've been called out in rebuttal testimony from utility companies, in my view, really inaccurately, sort of in a disparaging way. So my hope was to try to avoid all of that here in Maryland, and that's why we have been, suggested language about defensible standards and try to encourage an approach that would truly be collaborative and not just in voice. Now, I can't say what's going to happen with this process in Maryland. I hope that everyone is approaching it in good faith, and that the information that's shared by stakeholders will, be reflected. But I think,
Mr. Gravatt, can I interrupt you there and ask you?
Of course.
Thank you. You seem to operate, or perhaps OPC as well, seems to operate under the assumption that there is going to be a bias by this independent third-party contractor, and that bias would be against your position and in favor of the utilities position. Is there any grounds to believe that that bias exists, or perhaps the bias would be in your favor and against the utilities?
With respect, if I can reframe it slightly, I mean, I don't disagree with what you're suggesting. I think that what I would say is the bias is that potential studies are generally based on a bottom-up counting. We're going to count how many units there are and what the potential for that many is, and they're very, very often grounded in historical practice, which is, in my view, an inherent bias, because rather than looking at what the actual potential is, they look at what do we think we can do calibrated to what has been done in the past. So there is documentation. There's a study by American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy the study's called Cracking the Teapot. There's a study by the Regulatory Assistance Project that talks about the ways in which potential studies consistently undercount true potential. So yes, I believe that there is, so I don't want to, I guess what I want to say is I don't want to say that's the utilities view, but in my experience, utilities want to rely on what is sort of definitively known, and will say, because we can definitively count this, that makes this an empirically based truth, that this is what the potential is, and it's not more than that. I'll note that in Colorado, in the not recent, but this is now 3 years old, strategic issues proceeding for Xcel, public service company in Colorado, the commission found that the potential study, which informed the goals that the company proposed, was conservative and ordered the company to achieve about 30% more than what the potential study said was possible. And for the last 3 years, the company has been achieving those savings. In PSCo's recent energy resource plan filing, they acknowledged that the goals that they are now setting are higher than what the potential study said is possible, because they have consistently exceeded the savings that the potential study found to be the potential. So, in light of all this, I still support the potential study. I think it should be done. I think it has the opportunity to provide some really useful data for the commission in goal setting. But I actually looked back this morning at Order 80782, where the commission said, we find that the continued lack of completion of potential study can no longer be a barrier to establishing targets from power. A potential study, the results of which are highly dependent on the selected input assumptions, is only one of several tools that can be used in this endeavor. So, it's my view that we should take the data from the potential study. We should do it. We should all make our best efforts to inform a very full view of what's possible, but recognize that it's just one data set, and that.
Thank you, Mr. Gravatt. And respond to this. I get the sense that if we have the contractor and they have no discretion to vet all of the proposals, and they are required to put all of these proposals in the study report, doesn't that reduce some of the sort of the expertise that we're seeking to hire in this RFP? And instead we'll just receive a compilation, effectively the minutes of all suggestions, if that independent contractor doesn't have any authority whatsoever to deem what's appropriate and what's not, and sort through to assist the commission in separating the sort of the wheat from the chaff?
Well, I don't think I'm personally suggesting that the contractor should have no discretion. But, again, this is my view, and I don't want to appear to accuse anyone of anything, but the contractors who do this work, they understand who the client is, and they understand that if they don't make the client, and usually it's a utility company, if they don't keep the client happy, they're probably not going to get future work for that client. So I think the utility typically has a very outsized voice in determining how the potential is conceived. And
well, but it's true that the PSC, along with OPC, if I'm correct, selects the vendor. Is that right?
I believe that is how it is framed, yes.
Okay. All right. Mr. Cleaver, would you like to add any additional color in response to my questions?
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. I appreciate the opportunity. Your Honor, as to the, if I could go back to Your Honor's initial question to Mr. Gravatt regarding bias, speaking for OPC, I mean, we're not suggesting that there'd be anything, anyone would be doing anything inappropriate or deceitful or anything of that nature. But if you look to page 13 of the draft RFP that Judge McLean submitted, you can see here that there's a section 7, terms and conditions, that talks about the utility issuer And it talks about the utilities. And if you get on to item 6, it says final details and scope of the study and all applicable services are subject to negotiation between the bidder and the issuers. So, that there alone gives some concern as to a potential for bias. And, I would echo Mr. Gravat's comments, in that regard as well. Your Honor, you posed the question, well, what if the contractor is biased towards OPC and its interests or MEEA? If that happens, then I assume that the utilities would want the opportunity to provide feedback, and to the extent that it's made in good faith and that it's defensible, that in that event that the contractor at least provides a reason for why it determined not to include or incorporate that feedback into its ultimate report and recommendations, which the contractor, under what we've proposed, has the right to do. I would also,
But in this instance, the utilities don't share that concern. They're not protesting the RFP and saying, making the same argument that MEAA and OPC is.
yeah, I mean, Your Honor, I can't speak for the utilities. Again, I would point you to that language on page 13 regarding who's going to determine the final scope and details of the contract that's entered into. In terms of likelihood, again, not suggesting anything inappropriate from anyone, but if there is going to be a bias from a contractor, just based on that language alone on page 13, it would appear to potentially lie with, in favor of the utilities. That's where the bias would lie from the contractor. But what we've proposed, to the extent that it went the other way, it would provide protection to the utilities as well. But in terms of why the utilities may not have raised the same concern, that would be my best guess as to why. But again, I can't speak for them and why they may not have raised that. And just if I could very briefly address Mr. Michael's point, the language that he quoted, as I understand that's referring to the pre-draft report process. And there is language that refers to industry standards and benchmarks and so on, in terms of the initial kickoff meeting with stakeholders and then the data sets that are exchanged. But the language that we were focused on is in the following paragraph, which I won't read again, which I cited to in my initial comments, which concerns feedback on once the actual draft report is circulated. So that's two different stages that we're talking about. So I don't see the language that Mr. Michael quoted as being dispositive of the issue that we've raised here. That's all, Your Honor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cleaver. Ms. Mahoney, did you have any comments?
I did. Thank you so much. Just by way of introduction, my name is Maren Mahoney, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Ceres Energy Optimization Work Group. Ceres is a nonprofit sustainability advocacy organization that works with the country's largest companies and investors to build a more sustainable economy, including many members with significant operations, facilities, and business interests in Maryland. And the Energy Optimization Work Group is a separate work group within Ceres of more than 24 companies that's focused on enhancing opportunities for energy efficiency investment at the state and local levels. We've been engaged in the working group, in the future programming working group meetings, and just first of all wanted to thank Judge McLean for for guiding the discussion and having such a collaborative working group process thus far. And we want to thank you for the opportunity to provide some input on this RFP. We wanted to just mention, potential studies certainly can provide useful information when establishing an energy efficiency standard. However, there are some pitfalls that underestimate the energy efficiency potential and the greenhouse gas emissions reductions potential for a state or utility area. And the practical effect of these underestimates is that programs serving those businesses and the consumers are inadequately funded and or restricted in their services, and then ratepayers have to pay for generation or procurement of energy resources that are comparatively more expensive. So we think that it's important to include key savings opportunities in the potential study, such as emerging technologies, plug loads, consumer and business behaviors, that accounts for rapid decrease of costs of advanced and emerging technologies. We had just a few recommendations. One, we support OPC and the Maryland Energy Advocates position that stakeholder input is very important for these processes. I just wanted to mention, we had a recent presentation by Joe Loper, the independent evaluator for cost effectiveness of energy efficiency at the working group. And he had mentioned that bias is fought with the input of many perspectives. And I really appreciate that perspective. And I think that that's an important thing to consider when developing this RFP. Second, we also want to reiterate the fact that a potential study should not serve as the sole input for establishing long-term goals for Empower Maryland. They should inform the floor. And then third, we would like to say that we would recommend adding language to the RFP that expressly encourages the contractor to avoid the use of analytical methods and data that are based on antiquated or standard program design. Also input assumptions and forecasts that fail to account for new, more effective program design strategies and emerging technologies. So for example, the RFP could encourage analyses that look across electric and gas utilities and consider whole buildings, whole systems, whole processes that will offer multiple pathways and approaches for achieving high energy savings and greenhouse gas emissions reductions. That's all I have for today. I appreciate this opportunity to provide that input. Thank you so much.
Ms. Mahoney, I have a question on your presentation.
Certainly.
You seem to set the table by focusing on the potential to underestimate potential savings in a study. And doesn't an equal opportunity exist to overestimate potential savings in a study, thereby causing ratepayers to pay for programming that effectively is pursuing savings that will not materialize? Aren't both true? Aren't both possible?
Well, with the potential studies, there's often there are levels of screens that that the study would go through that would whittle down the opportunities, and so there's that it usually results in an underestimate. You know, as other stakeholders have pointed out, there are studies of there are meta studies, I suppose, of potential studies across the country that have shown the potential studies underestimate the opportunities for energy efficiency savings.
So there's no potential to overestimate savings.
We have not seen that.
I would suggest that I have. Some of these programs have dubious long life savings to me, and they're so anyway, we're not going to go into that today, but I think you need to honestly acknowledge, intellectually honestly acknowledge that the potential to underestimate or overestimate both exist.
If I may, you know, I think that sort of highlights an area where stakeholder engagement is really important, because during that process, the different you know, mistakes or you know, different data sets that could be incorporated, that's a really great opportunity for stakeholders to pinpoint where where there are differing areas of maybe of thought. So I think that's corrective.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. I will have other questions, but I just wanted to follow up on that point with you right now.
Commissioner Herman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hurley, what would you expect that the process after this report is filed, that there would be an opportunity for comments from parties if they did disagree with the outcome of the report?
I think with the process of this potential study, that with stakeholder feedback and development of the report, that yes, if there was still some non-consensus issues within that report, then there would be the opportunity for stakeholders to provide comments on where they disagree with the report.
Right, so that the commission could, if there was disagreement, which hopefully there wouldn't be, but if there was disagreement, the commission would be able to, in its ordinary customary process, would hear from anybody who disagreed. There would be the opportunity for that, correct?
That is correct.
Thank you. Mr. Cleaver, it seems to me that if one disagrees with the report, isn't it preferable to write your disagreement yourself than to have somebody else write it for you?
Your Honor, I think that what we've proposed, or well, what we've endorsed, I should really say, because it's MEEA's initial proposal. It would require in the report the contractor to include feedback that, to use the term, is defensible. But if the contractor determines not to use that, whatever the feedback is, the contractor itself has to provide an explanation as to why. If we get into and that would be contained in the report, and by holding the contractor to that standard, I think it would cause the contractor to be more carefully consider the feedback if the contractor is required to provide that explanation. And so it kind of builds in this added or heightened level of consideration on the part of the contractor. And then two, I think just by the nature of these things, if the report gets filed without any mention of various proposals that OPC, MEEA, or any party has put forth, and then after the fact, we're filing letters with the commission and saying, hey, they should have considered this, and then we go back, and it becomes much less likely that whatever the proposal is will ever really see the light of day. I mean, if this has been filed with the commission, and the contractor has represented, this is where we are with the report, we're finished. I think that it's more important to be able to get these ideas in front of the contractor with that standard up front.
So help me understand the evidentiary standard of defensible, because that's one I hadn't heard before. Is that something that's in the Maryland Rules of Evidence, or where's that come from?
I've never seen it in the Maryland Rules of Evidence, Your Honor. Fair question. And to be clear, OPC is not advocating, by endorsing MEEA's initial proposal, we're not advocating any kind of evidentiary standard that would apply in future Empower proceedings or any other kind of proceeding before the commission. But rather, the use of the term defensible, as I understand it in MEEA's proposal, is that there has to be some basis provided by a party as justifying or rationalizing the feedback that it has provided to the contractor. That adds an extra check against, some party. I wouldn't expect this to happen even without the language, but that provides a check against a party just throwing out wild ideas without any backup that the party can't defend. So it's not stated as any kind of evidentiary standard or any kind of burden of proof or any kind of standard that would govern the commission's adjudication of a proposal before it, but rather it just goes to the standard that the contractor would be held to as it considers the feedback from parties.
Except how do we hold somebody to a standard, Mr. Cleaver, that nobody understands what it means? I mean, that's, because one person, what you might think is kind of way out there and, not defensible. The person who's proposing it is always going to think that it's defensible. So, to me, I have a really hard time creating what you're calling a standard that nobody's ever nobody understands what it means, because it's kind of like in the eye of the beholder, right? You're not going to propose something that you think is not defensible. So how is that understandable to a contractor and to a bidder? And doesn't that potentially tell a lot of contractors, I don't want to get involved with this because I've got so much, there's so much, I have to include everything in anybody. And if I don't include it, I have to explain it. And, isn't that potentially causing our contractor pool to be smaller?
I don't think so, Your Honor. I mean, I think that defensible has a common meaning. It's a word that we know what it means, or we can resort to reference books like a dictionary if someone's confused as to what it means. And I just want to be very clear that in our letter, and again endorsing the MEAA position, we say that they have to include defensible contract, but to the extent that they don't choose to incorporate it, they have to explain why. So to take Your Honor's example, if OPC presented some suggestion and the contractor said, why are you saying this and what's the basis for that, and OPC was not able to provide any reasonable rationale for what it was saying, then the contractor could say, OPC said this, it wasn't able to defend it, and we're not including it for that reason, whatever the reason is. There is still a fair amount of discretion vested in the contractor under what's been proposed. The contractor can still exclude recommendations, but it just has to explain why it chooses to exclude these recommendations that are made in response to the draft report.
Right. I get that, Mr. Cleaver, but it seems to me that we already have those kinds of protections built in when we have comments and the opportunity to respond to comments. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. Commissioner Linton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone. I had a question for staff, Mr. Hurley. In your opening statement, you noted that this was not a consensus document, and other parties have said the same thing. So I'm really just trying to get a feeling for how many instances there could be where the parties would disagree to the point where this proposed language would become necessary to use or rely on. I don't need to hear every possible situation, but I'm just trying to get an understanding. In your opinion, are we looking at just a couple of instances? Are we looking at a whole lot of instances? Or are we looking at something that could make the report significantly longer than it would be had this language not been included?
Thank you, Commissioner. And I'll let my other work group members answer that question as well. I would anticipate, and this is a high-level guess, but anywhere from, it's probably more than a couple, but I don't think it's anything that's going to make this process untenable. So we should be able to successfully complete this report. But I would ask the other stakeholders to comment on that question as well.
Any other, Mr. Gravatt?
I'd be happy to. I'll try to answer briefly, and perhaps more generally. I don't anticipate significant conflict, but the reason we proposed this language and our real hope was to, rather than litigate this after the report is done, to try to produce a report that all of the stakeholders, or let's say all of the stakeholders, will mostly endorse. A recent potential study that we commented on in another state, we asked the contractor to consider enhanced program designs, better outreach and marketing. Would that increase the potential? They did not include that. So and our concern is that potential studies tend to be presented as the truth. But as has been noted in several of the meta studies that I've referred to, they aren't the truth. They're based on, and in fact, as the commission itself noted in 2015, they're based on many, many assumptions. And when the consultant has the discretion to disregard the recommendations and then presents a report as if it's the truth, then that's disappointing. And I think, to Commissioner O'Donnell's question earlier, of course, potential studies have the possibility of overstating potential. I have never seen that happen in this realm. I've seen it understate potential frequently. With a Michigan utility recently, the potential study estimated that the achievable potential in the year that it was released, which so let's say 2021, was about 30% less than what the utility was actually achieving. That's how they usually go. They don't have to. But we think that being able to provide input in a more collaborative way will increase the chance that the commission will have something that it can base a really well-informed decision on. It should say, this is what is really possible, but this is what it's going to take to get there. I certainly appreciate the inclusion of a scenario that compares, that looks at what it would take to reach the greenhouse gas abatement targets that the MDE has included in its analysis. I think that will be very informative and does cast the potential study in a different light than they typically are, where they just look at achievable based on often a lot of assumptions that they don't even say what they are. Sorry, I'm going on.
Thank you, Mr. Gravatt. I can tell you from my vantage point, I would not view the potential study as the truth. I think the commission will question it, question the outcome and recommendations of the consultant. Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hurley, I have a question for you. Beyond this instant discussion that's consuming this whole item on the agenda with regard to this proposed language by OPC and MEAA, were there other significant areas of non-consensus in the work group beyond this instant discussion that we should be aware of that's not being discussed right now?
In terms of the process, I'll keep this brief. The utilities issued a draft RFP that went out to all stakeholders, and all stakeholders were able to provide comments and review of the draft RFP, and we held several, what I'm quoting, subgroups just based on the RFP. And most of the suggested edits were considered by the utilities and reflected in the RFP. This is the major issue. I think anything else is more minor as compared to this issue raised by MEEA and OPC.
All right, thank you. I appreciate knowing that.
Thank you, Commissioner. I would venture to say if this is the major issue, we're not in terribly bad shape to begin with. As I just noted to Mr. Gravatt, the commission will question the ultimate study. We will not take that study as the gospel. I am not as sympathetic to the MEEA position at this time, and I would be in a position to approve the work group's request to issue this RFP in its current form. I would highlight Commissioner Herman's comments with respect to the strength of the argument. I think it would be much stronger if a party who feels that the consultant report didn't accurately review, consider the input that was provided, defensible or not, would have an opportunity to articulate in their own words their concerns and put that on the record after the commission receives the study. And the commission will review those concerns, any allegations of bias at that time. Before I call a motion, do any commissioners wish to say anything additional?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess in this discussion, I've actually been persuaded by OPC, Mia, and Ms. Mahoney. I think we want to make this report as useful, and we want to make sure it's a legitimate report. And I really think that it's important that all parties feel like it truly is an inclusive and collaborative process. So if this simple language will ensure that the parties do feel that way. It doesn't seem like it would really harm the process at all. I think, you know, we're kind of venturing into a new area of as we shape the direction of Empower Maryland, and I think, you know, issues of equity, issues of, you know, how it deals with the, you know, low income, how we bring in all viewpoints about how programs will impact the environment positively or negative. I think we're going to need all that, and so again, it doesn't seem like it's a difficult threshold to just simply ask the contractor, because this is the one time I mean, I agree, we're not going to necessarily just go on this report without question, but if this is in fact an expert that is being procured to get all the best information, I think we want to have a high threshold to make sure that all input is being considered, and therefore, if it's not in the report, you know, it won't be as good or useful or legitimate as a report. So I find it a very reasonable request, simple language, and I thought Mr. Cleaver, you know, point about this will actually, you know, make the contractor maybe a little more open to suggestions, or at least be able to articulate why they did not take a perspective into view. So, and for that reason, I would like to propose a motion to the proposed motion, or amendment to the proposed motion to include the language that is being proposed by MIA by OPC.
Okay, I'll poll your colleagues in support of a alternative motion to support the proposal set forth by MEEA and supported by OPC. The vote begins with Commissioner Herman.
This is in support of OPC and MEEA's language?
Correct. This is Commissioner Richards' alternative motion.
Okay, no, I would not support that motion.
Commissioner Linton.
No.
Commissioner Commissioner O'Donnell.
No, Mr. Chairman, and at some point I'd like to give my opinion about some of this.
Commissioner Richards on record as approving. I vote no, the motion fails. Before I call a final motion, Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the efforts to be inclusive in this report and this potential study, and I think we will achieve that by the nature of the process. And I appreciate the concerns about potential bias. But having said that, I don't want to bog this process down, because I am of the mind, being a member of the legislature for 22 years almost, is that every position is defensible. You wouldn't offer an opinion that's not defensible. So every opinion, suggestion is defensible. There's no standard here as to defensibility, and I have concerns about who determines defensibility. I think you're adding a level of complication to a study that will get bogged down and be voluminous, because everybody's opinion has to be justified. Everybody's opinion is not right, but it's their opinion. And just because it's an opinion, it's defensible to that person, or they won't offer it. So I just think we made the right decision on this, and I'm going to support the RFP. I hope we get some useful information, but I wanted to give my opinion on the record. Thank you.
Thank you. At this point, I will propose that we approve the Empower Maryland Future Programming Workgroup's request to issue a request for a proposal for the potential study to assist the development of future Empower Maryland goals. The vote begins with Commissioner Herman.
Aye.
Commissioner Linton.
Aye.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Aye.
And Commissioner Richard.
And I will be voting aye for the RFP, and hope that all views are heard and nothing is squelched in the final report. So it is useful to us. So again, aye.
I vote aye. The motion is approved. With nothing further on today's administrative meeting, this meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.